In the last few minutes, I've been talking to the UK independence leader, Nigel Farage, an interesting and very colourful man. 40 years of Europe is being celebrated today. I asked him, was he celebrating? 40 years of Europe, I'm sure you're celebrating this morning.
No, not at all. It's a very different Europe to the one that we signed up to. You know, my parents' generation were told it was going to be a common market, we'd cooperate together, but there was no threat or risk to British sovereignty, to British parliamentary self-control. And here we are 40 years on, with 75% of our laws now not made in Westminster, with whole rafts of employment legislation, of environmental legislation, of health and safety madness, damaging British businesses, and for the privilege of all of this, the British taxpayer paying a membership fee of £53 million a day to belong to this European Union. So I'm afraid it's turned into something rather different, and I want a divorce.
Yeah, but that £53 million a year, even though you want a divorce, that £53 million a day marriage generates jobs, it safeguards jobs, and it gives us a say on a platform which is heard right the way across the world. If we come out of it, then we're basically opting just to be little old Britain.
Well, firstly, on jobs. The idea that if we weren't in the European Union, that British and German consumers wouldn't buy each other's products is frankly nonsense. I mean, we do business with countries all over the world without being in political union with them, and people should remember that the European Union sell us far more than we sell them. It's in their interests, even more than ours, to have a sensible free trade arrangement. So I've never bought this idea that jobs are under threat, apart, of course, from the MEPs and the British people that work in the European Commission, because they'd all be sacked, including myself. So I haven't got a problem with that. I am the turkey that would vote for Christmas. But this other idea that the Foreign Office have been advancing for 40 years, that as part of a bigger club, we have a bigger say on the world stage. Well, let's examine that. When the World Trade Organization meets to talk about global trade, the United Kingdom, despite being the 6th biggest economy in the world and the 5th largest trading nation in the world, we're asked to leave the room. Please go. You're not allowed in here. Only the big boys are in here discussing global trade, because we're represented by an unelected European Commissioner. Now, that is completely unacceptable. Here we are, speaking English, with amazing relationships all over the world, particularly through the Commonwealth, and pretty good relations with the United States of America, and we're forbidden from making our own trade deals with any other part of the world. And that means that actually we have a smaller voice in the world than we would as an independent nation.
Right, but Europe would close ranks on us. There'd be an import tax probably on goods coming from Britain back onto the continent. It could be pretty unattractive for businesses.
Can you imagine Angela Merkel ringing up the boss of Mercedes and saying, I've got some bad news for you, chaps. Because we decided to put taxes on British products coming into our country, they've now put a big tax on Mercedes coming into Britain. What do you think the boss of Mercedes would say to Angela Merkel? I mean, he wouldn't be very happy, would he? It's madness to think that they're going to get involved in any sort of tariff war with us when they... Do you know, in the last 5 years, they have sold us £200 billion worth of goods more than we have sold them. So, frankly, the political forces in France and Germany and Italy would be so strong, saying to their own governments, don't be so stupid, or you will cost us many jobs in our own country.
What about Obama and what he's had to say?
I think that the Americans and the State Department have completely misread the European Union from day one. What they don't understand is that the EU is fundamentally anti-American, and I've sat in that parliament for 13 years, and the hostility towards America and its values is quite astonishing. What they also don't realise is that if the European Union does push on with an army, a navy, an air force and a foreign policy, that it will actually supplant NATO, and that if Britain is part of that, America will have lost its best ally in the world. And so I think the State Department, Obama's administration, are fundamentally misunderstanding what the EU is, and their real priority should be to maintain as good a relationship with the United Kingdom as possible, and the route they're advocating will damage that.
What I found really fascinating when I was reading through just some of the traffic, some of the conversation that has been had on EU membership and our role inside Europe recently is this upcoming eagerly anticipated speech by David Cameron, eagerly anticipated by many people, probably yourself included. He's expected to offer a referendum after 2015. Now, the Deputy Prime Minister questioned why there should be a great national debate about nothing very much in particular. Nick Clegg's getting vocal on this. What would you say to him?
Well, Nick Clegg, of course, is leader of a party who are Euro fanatics. Nick Clegg wanted to take us into the Euro. Thank goodness we didn't listen to Nick Clegg then, and I see no reason to listen to Nick Clegg now. He is trying to downplay, oh, Europe, don't worry about that. It doesn't really matter. Yes, it does. 75% of our laws are being made somewhere else. It's costing us a fortune, and it's robbed us of our democracy in this country, something that our grandparents' generation actually fought to preserve.
This is very, Mr. Farage, this is very emotive, and I always enjoy talking to you because I love the emotion in your voice. But paint me a picture. Come on, paint me a picture of Britain outside of Europe and underpin it with one word: reality.
Self-confidence. That's what we'd get back, not being part of a European Union, knowing that if we did not want to give prisoners the vote, we wouldn't have to. Knowing...
Why are you obsessed with the side issues, the sideshow? Let's talk about jobs. Let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about what really affects real people.
Let's talk about the 4.2 million small businesses in this country, many of whom now do not want to take on school leavers or young employees. They are so terrified of employment legislation. And the government know it, and the opposition know it, and there's not a single thing the British Parliament can do about any of this. It doesn't matter whether you have a Labour government or a Tory government. All of those employment laws are set somewhere else. Let's talk about the lunacy of carbon taxes that we're putting onto British manufacturing industry. Aluminium plants, both of them now closed. They cannot afford the carbon taxes. Steel plants leaving this country and relocating to India. And nothing a British government can do about it because all of these things are part of EU agreements and EU law. So these things do impact very much on jobs in this country. And I haven't even mentioned open door immigration, total open door to Poland, the Baltic states, and from January next year, a total open door to the really poor countries of Bulgaria and Romania. And this really, I think, is right at the top of people's discussion and national debate in this country. How can it be right to have a massive oversupply in the unskilled labour market in our country when we have over 1 million young people without jobs?
Okay.
And how can it be fair to claim social security benefits on day one coming into this country when there are British families that are paid in for generations?
When I've conducted interviews in the past with the UK Independence Party, with yourself, with other members, it's felt like you have been painted as extremists. Now it feels that you are probably representing a very popular opinion. How does it feel to be welcomed in from the political cold? Nigel Farage, the man with the message, the man who's now very popular.
It reminds me of a great little story that the late stand-up comedian Bob Monkhouse used to tell. Bob Monkhouse used to say, when I was growing up, I told my friends and family that when I was older, I was going to become a comedian. And they laughed at me. Well, he said, they're not laughing now. And that really is how it feels for us. I mean, when I think of the derision, mockery and abuse that I took certainly 10 years ago, and this sort of feeling that basically UKIP were swivel-eyed and bonkers and extreme and talking about things that ordinary folk didn't care about. And now we see in the opinion polls that these great issues around jobs and immigration and cost and all the things that Europe, our membership of Europe, is doing to us. And now we've got a majority in Britain of 2-1 who say in a referendum they'd vote to get our country back. All I can say is I'm absolutely over the moon.
Nigel Farage, who I was talking to about 10 minutes ago while you were listening to the news, and Nigel's always very entertaining on the radio, and I remember one of my favourite political interviews of all time was on my BBC WM show in Birmingham, and Nigel and I had a discussion literally about the price of fish. It wasn't a discussion, it was actually a row where he ended up shouting at me about the price of cod and a disagreement we were having about cod and other fish and crustaceans saving the British economy. Sorry, forgive me, I've lost my train of thought there. Saving the economy. Anyway, that was a discussion we had on BBC W. So I'm ever so sorry. I've completely lost my train of thought. It's 11.